Welcome to the zombie nation, where the dead walk and the living run. There was silence in the streets, but inside every home, fires were burning. Not the fire of stoves, the fire that burned deep inside wounded hearts. In one corner of Noraz, where old ration containers were stored, a small group of zombie children sat huddled together. Their faces were covered in dust, their eyes full of fear, and their lips trembling with questions. "Papa, will they kill us too?" little Alex asked his father Noah. Noah didn't answer. He simply pulled his son into his arms and held him close. His body was covered in old scars, but his heart had just received fresh wounds. "No, son. No one will hurt you now," he whispered, though he didn't believe it himself. In the center of the settlement, in a large open ground, every zombie in Noraz had gathered. All eyes were fixed on King Elijah, standing on a raised stone platform. Beside him stood Joshua and the other commanders, Lucas, Marcus, and Travis. Their faces were tight with pain and fury, but their eyes held the weight of final decisions. Elijah raised his pale white eyes toward the sky, as if asking the heavens for one last permission. Then he spoke. "We wanted peace. We offered it. We tried. We sent our children to school. We built high walls so humans wouldn't fear us. We swallowed their hatred for the sake of harmony. And what did we get? Our mothers were taken. Our wives were killed. Our children were butchered. We asked for life. They gave us death. We will not speak anymore. We will step forward." War preparations began immediately. Even the wounded picked up weapons. Those who couldn't walk grabbed bows and arrows. The women hid their children in reinforced rooms, then joined the men to fight. This wasn't a war over land. It was for dignity, for survival, for the right to exist. On the other side, in the human cities, panic had begun to spread. Franklin Rowe kept warning the president and his advisors. "These are not the mindless creatures you once fought. They are people now, united, led, and with nothing left to lose." But President Raymond Walsh laughed. "We took back New York. We saved Washington. These zombies are nothing but dead flesh." That very night, the Noraz army began descending quietly from the mountains. Their feet sank into the soil, but their hearts beat like thunder. Elijah stopped near a cliff before the valley and looked over his army. "We will not destroy their cities. We will not become what they think we are. We will break their pride, not their bones. We will take their sleep, not their lives." But the first human settlement they reached told another story. It was a small village. Human soldiers had captured and burned the bodies of zombie children and hung them on trees. Among them was Joshua's younger sister. Elijah looked down, silent. But Joshua did not. He rushed forward and drove his spear into the chest of a soldier. The humans screamed. The war had begun. The sound of bullets, screams in the wind, and smoke rising into the skies, everything was changing. The zombies did not back down. They stormed villages, overran outposts, and made their presence known all the way to Washington sector. The humans now knew they were facing something new, a storm that carried the cries of those who had been wronged for too long. Franklin Rowe stood again in front of the president. "If you do not speak now, neither side will survive. I will go to them. I will carry the message of peace." The president, finally shaken, gave a slight nod. Perhaps for the first time, he saw what was coming. That night, Franklin held up an old white flag and set out with a small convoy toward the gates of Noraz. They were not welcomed. The gate remained shut. A voice rang from the inside. "This is war. We don't talk anymore." Franklin answered calmly, "I didn't come to speak for humans. I came to offer what's rightfully yours." Moments later, the gate creaked open, and there stood King Elijah. His eyes were bloodshot, but his face calm. He looked at the flag, then at Franklin, and said, "If you speak truth, come in. But if you bring lies, remember, many like you came to kill us before. But now we are no longer dying. We are alive." The night in Noraz was heavier than usual. Even the wind felt like it carried memories of screams and broken promises. Inside one of the small houses built from scrap iron and worn stone, an old zombie named Marcus sat with his broken arm bandaged, staring into nothing. Across from him sat a boy named Dylan, no older than 6, his one eye badly scarred from a human raid weeks ago. Will there be light in our streets again? Dylan asked. Marcus, who had lived through 2 great zombie migrations, replied, only if we make them see that we are not the monsters they imagine. But it was already too late for words. Just a day before, a young zombie named Sam had returned from the edge of human territory, his arms carrying the lifeless body of his daughter. He didn't speak for hours. When he finally did, his voice trembled like dry leaves in wind. They shot her while she was picking wildflowers. They laughed while she bled. Sam had never been a warrior. He was a healer. But that night, he melted down his medical tools to forge blades. At the edge of the city, another mother, Clara, had just buried what remained of her newborn. Her hands were trembling as she closed the makeshift grave. They threw him into a burning pile, she cried. He never even saw sunlight. The nearby zombies didn't cry. They couldn't. They'd run out of tears long ago. They sharpened more weapons instead. King Elijah had called another secret council. This time, the fire in his eyes wasn't just pain. It was something older, rage carved by centuries of suffering. We will strike a place they never expected. Not with fire, not with bombs. With justice, he said. The commanders nodded. Lucas, who had lost his wife the night before, whispered, if we fall, let it be known, we fell standing. Meanwhile, in the human capital, the media painted the zombies as bloodthirsty attackers. Zombies break peace again, said one headline. Monsters burn down farming settlements, said another. No one told the stories of Sam's daughter or Clara's child. No one showed what Noraz had become, a city of ashes, held together by hope. Franklin Rowe watched the reports in silence. His office was dim, papers scattered everywhere. He picked up one photo, a picture of him shaking hands with King Elijah 3 years ago. Back when peace was still possible. Back when humans still had the choice not to hate. He clenched the photo in his fist and made a decision. If I have to walk through fire, I'll go. But this cannot end in genocide. While Franklin prepared to go back into Noraz, the zombie army prepared to march farther. Their next target was not military, it was symbolic. An old. The nights in Haven Hill had always been bright, but tonight an eerie silence hung in the air. A small squad of zombies had quietly planned to enter the city. They carried no bombs, no rifles, only the fire of injustice and the weight of grief. In their hands were old axes and broken tools, but in their eyes there was something more dangerous, memory. Marcus, Lucas, Sam, and Clara moved like shadows. Their faces were empty of emotion, like something inside had already died. This isn't revenge, Marcus had whispered. It's a reminder that we are still alive. At exactly 3 a.m., when the human guards usually fell asleep, the zombies reached the city square. There stood the statue of General Harkner, the human war hero who led the last zombie extermination campaign. Marcus took the first swing of his hammer. The iron echoed against the metal neck of the statue. Lucas followed, then Clara, then Sam. The cracks grew deeper, louder. One final blow, and the statue fell to the ground with a crash, as if the pride of Haven Hill had shattered with it. The sound rang across the city. Alarms screamed. Military troops scrambled. But the zombies had already disappeared. In their place, they left a scorched metal plate, nailed into the ground, blood smeared across it with a message. We did not crawl from caves. We came from burning villages. Our children's screams will write history, and your silence is your crime. The message went viral. For the first time, media channels hesitated. Some questioned whether humans were truly the victims. But the retaliation came fast. The very next day, human jets dropped bombs on Noraz. Entire villages were turned into ash. Schools, hospitals, even the water supply was poisoned. It wasn't war, it was genocide. A list of the dead was laid before King Elijah. On that list was Dylan, the boy who once told Marcus he still believed in light. That light was now gone. Elijah stood from his throne and unchained a sword that had hung behind him for 20 years. He hadn't touched it since the Great Separation. His voice was cold, hollow. There are only 2 paths left now: complete destruction or impossible peace. Franklin Rowe had arrived in Noraz by then. He had heard the stories, but nothing prepared him for what he saw. Burned houses, crushed toys, silence where laughter used to be. He met with Elijah. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Franklin said, "I was one of those who watched in silence. I don't want to watch anymore. I want to change something." Elijah turned to him slowly. "Then prepare yourself for a war that will be fought with words." Franklin returned to the human capital and held a press conference. Cameras clicked. Lights flashed. He stood before the world and said, "I went to Norez. I saw Marcus, who lost his child. I saw Clara, whose arms were cut off. I saw a grave made from dust. On it was written, I was never given the right to live. It's time we looked in the mirror. What have we become?" Some humans listened. Most called him a traitor. But something had cracked. In the wall, in their minds, in their pride. Back in Norez, inside an old meeting hall, Elijah and his council debated. Should they launch a full assault, or try one last attempt at peace? They knew peace might cost them their dignity, but war would cost them generations. And somewhere under the same sky, Clara's missing arms, Marcus' broken soul, Sam's buried daughter, and Dylan's silent eyes were all asking the same question. Is justice only for the powerful? 3 days had passed since Franklin's speech shook the capital. Most dismissed him as deluded. Others called him a traitor to his own species. But one man, General Roy Hamilton, couldn't sleep that night. He had led the assault on Norez. He had given the order to bomb the children's hospital. He stared at the screen in his office. Photos of Clara's broken arms, of Dylan's tiny grave, of a message painted in blood. Our children's screams will write history. His own granddaughter had died of cancer 2 years ago, and now he imagined someone dropping bombs on her memory. He turned off the screen and poured himself a drink. "What if we're wrong?" he whispered, but no one answered. Back in Norez, the air smelled of dust and firewood. The council chamber was tense. For the first time in years, the debate was not about attack strategies, but about peace conditions. Elijah stood before the other zombie leaders, Sam, Clara, Marcus, Lucas, and new faces too, survivors who had risen in the ashes. "We will ask for their weapons to be moved out of a 100-mile zone," Elijah said. "We will ask for water supply restoration, for food trucks under neutral control, and for an international investigation into the mass graves around Haven Hill. We do not beg, we demand. And if they deny, we take back what was always ours." Clara's voice cracked. "And what if they smile, say yes, and still kill our children tomorrow?" Elijah replied, "Then let the world see us rise and burn at the same time. But not before we make them choose between peace and cowardice." A neutral meeting zone was set, an old train station at the border, long abandoned, now surrounded by rust and wild vines. On one side, Franklin Rowe arrived with a few unarmed advisors. On the other, King Elijah walked in with no guards, no weapons, only a scroll in his hand, the demands of Norez. The silence between them was thick. Franklin spoke first. "Before you say anything, I want you to know, I don't represent the humans who poisoned your water. I represent the humans who stayed awake the night after, the ones who wept." Elijah handed over the scroll. "Then let's see if your tears are worth more than our blood." The talks lasted for hours. Words were thrown like daggers. History, pain, betrayal, and death sat in the room like ghosts. But by the time night fell, something impossible had happened. A draft was prepared, the Norez Haven Accords, a document that declared ceasefire, mutual rebuilding, shared territory, and war crimes investigation. General Hamilton refused to sign it. Half the human Senate walked out, but millions of civilians began marching in favor of peace. Videos of zombie children in refugee camps flooded social media. Hashtags like #children are not enemies and #justice for Dylan began trending worldwide. A week later, the document was signed. But peace was not a spell. It was a war of a different kind. Human extremists attacked aid convoys. A zombie rebel group tried to assassinate a human mayor. And in the middle of it all, a small school opened on the border where human and zombie children learned to write each other's names. One day, a little girl named Ava, human, and a zombie boy named Kian sat under a broken tree, laughing over a spelling mistake. "You're weird," Ava said. Kian grinned, showing half his teeth. "Better weird than dead." Nearby, Franklin stood watching with tears in his eyes, and Elijah, leaning on his cane, said softly, "Maybe we just saved the world by listening to the only people who still know how to forgive." Peace had a smell, and in Norez, it was the scent of wet cement and warm bread. Months passed. Homes were rebuilt. Streets echoed with cautious laughter. But beneath every moment of calm lay the memory of everything they had lost. Elijah, now walking slower with each passing day, spent his mornings near the memorial wall. Carved into stone were thousands of names, zombie and human alike. Children, warriors, mothers, traitors, peacemakers. One name was framed in gold: Clara. She had been killed by a rogue sniper 2 weeks after the treaty was signed. No suspects, no answers, only silence. Franklin visited often. He and Elijah never called each other friends, but they shared something deeper: guilt and the burden of survival. Clara believed in the bridge, Franklin once said. She just didn't live long enough to cross it. "She built it with her bones," Elijah replied. "Now it's our job to carry the weight." On the edge of Norez, a new city emerged. Not zombie, not human, just different. It had no borders, only checkpoints. No anthem, only silence where explosions used to be. A council ran it, half zombie, half human. They called it Unity District. In Unity, there were no flags. No schools that taught war. Just Ava and Kian's generation. Children who asked, "What's a war?" instead of, "When is the next one?" But the world wasn't perfect. Resistance movements rose. News channels twisted the truth. Politicians fed fear. A human senator called zombies walking infections. A zombie radical detonated a bus in Haven Hill. Peace trembled, but it did not fall, because the bridge between pain and progress had already been walked. Because every grave told a story, and every child born after the war was a chapter in a new book. Elijah died one morning, quietly, sitting in his chair by the window. In his hand was a folded note addressed to Franklin. It read, "We were never monsters. We just wanted to live. Keep reminding them. Don't let our silence be mistaken for surrender." Franklin spoke at Elijah's funeral. Cameras were banned. No reporters. Just people. Real ones. Human and zombie. In a quiet field under the Norez sky, he said, "This man was called a monster, a rebel, a king. But I knew him only as a father who lost his son, and a leader who refused to turn his grief into genocide. He gave us peace not because he forgot the war, but because he remembered every scream." Ava placed flowers on the grave. Kian stood beside her, holding her hand. And somewhere, maybe in another city, another child asked their parent, "Were zombies real?" And the parent smiled and said, "They were. They are. But that's not what matters. What matters is what we chose to become after." In the end, no one won the war, but everyone won the peace.